No mai haere mai. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Greetings to you all. Please come in. Welcome to those who are coming from the other sessions. Find your seats and be welcome to the final plenary session of our symposium. My name is Matthew Nitsky, and it is my honor to introduce Professor David Suggett today. A couple of moments of housekeeping before I do so. The organizing committee will send out an attendance certificate after the conference, so look into your inboxes for those. And to convince you all to stay for the closing ceremony, they very also kindly organized ice cream for you. But you have to stay to the end for that. It will be just out here on level 5 as you walk out the door. Round of applause for the ice cream. Okay, now into the introduction. Please find your seats and we'll be getting started. So many of you know Dave for his excellence in coral reef science. But you might not know that in the early 2000s, Dave was busy establishing international recognition in another field. At the Southampton Oceanography Centre and later at the University of Essex, Dave pioneered the use of microsecond chlorophyll fluorescence measurements to study photosynthesis in the global oceans. This research is still amongst his most highly cited science today. In the mid-2000s, he exported these innovations to reef-forming corals, studying the breakdown of symbiont photosynthetic reactions during coral bleaching. There follows what must have been an incredibly intensive decade of foundational research on both coral physiology and stunning places, might I add, like Brazil, the Seychelles, Indonesia, while in parallel cementing that status as a global leader within the aquatic photosynthesis community. Lucky for all of us, Dave increasingly turned his focus to coral reefs, establishing and leading the Future Reefs team at the University of Technology in Sydney 2013. He then co-founded the Coral Nurture Program, a unique partnership between researchers, operators, and traditional owners to develop a stewardship-based management on the Great Barrier Reef. Dave is now the director of the KAUST Coral Restoration Initiative at Shusha Island in Saudi Arabia, and this is the world's largest coral reef restoration effort. And finally, if I may call back to the opening plenary, we learned something from Dan Hikaroa called kaitiakitanga. Kaitiakitanga is the role that we all play as environmental stewards. And I think Dave has really found himself in this. He's found himself in kaitiakitanga. And why is that? A common thread amongst all of our plenary speakers is that step one of being a great steward is to serve your community. This is called manakitanga, kindness, generosity, support, and the uplifting of people. And that's Dave. So please, ICRS, join me in welcoming Dave on stage for his plenary speech.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. And I have to say a huge thank you to Matt for a really generous introduction. Also, a huge thank you to ICRS and the organising committee, not only for the opportunity to talk all things restoration and really helping close out the conference, but also a really outstanding and exceptional meeting. I'm sure you've all had a fantastic week. It has been brilliant connecting with all of you and as well making many new commitments and relationships as well. So to begin, I certainly want to acknowledge the Mana Whenua and obviously acknowledge the country that we're in. And it has been a spectacular journey for all of us already, I think, over the past week, as we said. And what you can see in this image here is really iconic of what we're used to seeing globally, and that is beautiful forests. Okay, I'm going to start with trees before we get to reefs, and that's really important. We quite often call coral reefs the rainforests of the sea, and obviously on land is no different. This is one image of 3,500 restoration projects in New Zealand alone. We're used to seeing restoration in terrestrial spheres, and this is an example here of indigenous restoration, reforestation, returning agricultural lands back to their pristine state. We're also used to seeing these images, increasingly more so certainly from the terrestrial sphere, and that is recovery of lands at scale. The images on the left-hand side are from Brazil, on the right-hand side from Ecuador, and they're icons of images we see elsewhere. And two critical statistics I want to impress on you is 2026 has been a really important year for restoration globally. First of all, We've passed halfway through the UN Decade of Ecological Restoration, a really important decade for us in accelerating our efforts for restoration to be a conservation tool. 2026 also marked the year that Costa Rica was the first tropical nation to reverse deforestation. It's doubled the amount of forests over the past few decades. China is another great example. In 2026, it now has 25% reforested land. That's increased from 10% in the past few decades. Forests now span 2.5 million kilometers squared. It has returned $500 billion back to the economy. So it really impresses just how far we have come in the terrestrial space in terms of restoration. Moving closer to the sea, mangroves are no different. And again, 2026 was a huge year for mangroves. It was the very first year we saw a net increase in mangroves, accelerating the rate of decline. And that was through a combination of reforestation efforts as well as reduction of pressures. For coral reefs, it's a different story, and I'm going to try and impress on you that 2026 has also been a really, really important year for reefs. This is one of many, again, images that we're used to seeing now from the Caribbean. This is a beautiful example of Coral Restoration Foundation of staghorn coral, of Acropora palmata, going through a recovery phase in a specific reef system. It really marks that we're starting to see restoration grow and grow at scale, as I'll impress on you hopefully in the next 45 minutes or so. But what's most important here is we're a young field. We're still establishing. Really, we've only seen restoration galvanize and accelerate since the 2000s, even though restoration effort in reefs really started in the 1970s. And what you're already starting to see, even though we're a relatively young field compared to terrestrial systems, is images such as this. On the left-hand side, this is one example at one scale for reefs, small-scale local recovery of small areas. This is a bear bommy, and the top left-hand side is about 1.5 years after planting. The bottom left-hand side is about 3 years after planting. We can generate recovery. What you'll see in this video, I like to call this the front line of restoration. This is a video. It's one of my videos, so it's extremely poor. But the point here is this is Bontasur, or Hope Reef in Indonesia. This is one of Mars's flagship sites. They've recovered now 4 hectares, over 4 hectares of reef. And we're used to seeing reef recovery move into our daily norm. In this system, it's a socio-ecological norm now for this community, and I'll talk more about that as we go. And this has really been leveraged by an immense dedication. Many of you in the room have contributed to this, and you may even see some of these familiar photographs of yourselves in these images. But you've all contributed to a change, and a really, really aggressive change in terms of how we view our relationship with coral reefs. So we're getting much more involved in terms of developing tools and technologies to actually nurture natural recovery rates. And that effort and that intensive, galvanizing, community-based approaches really is starting to demonstrate we're seeing direct goals and outcomes of reef restoration. It's fairly clear what those goals are. We have to return our ecological states. But in doing so, what we're starting to see is a whole load of what we call spillover benefits and outcomes. Many of them are social ecological connections, but more broadly as well, when we talk about social ecological connections, it also spins into the academic space. So reef restoration, we always like to say it's not just an ecological challenge, it's a social challenge, and it's bringing those two elements together. So when we talk reef restoration, what do we mean? And this is an important part of how we communicate what we do. And actually, we have been restoring reefs for decades, if not hundreds of years, and simply because regeneration is the process of preserving reefs to enable natural recovery. That in itself is restoring a system through a fairly passive intervention, but an intervention nonetheless. And marine protected areas, of course, is one great example. And even though that's more established, what we really more commonly associate when we talk coral reef restoration is the more active intervention phase. And that is where we get stuck in, we use rehabilitation, ecological engineering, or coral restoration through propagation itself to actually actively kickstart recovery or certainly support or augment natural recovery rates. That's where most of our efforts have remained, but as we grow and as we mature, we're increasingly starting to see coral reef ecosystem restoration. We are measuring the very outcomes of those interventions working at a very small scale, whether that's a geographic scale or whether it's an ecological scale, we're moving much closer towards coral reef ecosystem recovery in an immeasurable way. Now, the most critical part of this is the evidence. And it's fair to say that until recently, coral reef restoration has had an evidence problem. And you can simply look at some previous articles that really evaluated the efficacy of reef restoration. And understandably, the take-home message has been reef restoration doesn't work. It is not scalable. It is not effective. And that is because the evidence that we have had to present has remained trapped within the actual process itself. Many of the studies prior to 2020, and we were involved in some of these studies as well, have really struggled to move beyond the scientific literature of reporting small-scale ecological experiments. And that's fine. And actually, many of those ecological experiments are designed to report failures. And so what that has meant is that we have had to work extremely hard to rebuild the evidence base and demonstrate that what we are doing is actually making a difference. And that is what I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about now. I really want to call out this study. It was presented by the lead authors, Julia Briand, Steph Green's group, and they're the two lead authors of this particular work. And I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking through that study for those of you that missed this presentation, because it marks another moment for reef restoration, why 2026 is so important. This was the first study to galvanize work from over 40 organizations to actually mine the data sets that had remained hidden to actually uncover the patterns and processes at play. So this image here demonstrates the gray circles are where we have coral reefs globally, 55,000 sites. And then the colored circles are where we have restoration activity. These are the GCRMN designations in the different colors. And what you can see is reef restoration is now globally according to not only these 40 organizations, but wider afield. Covers 84 countries' territory. It is a global phenomenon. This spans about 5 decades of reporting and activity. And what's really important here is that even though there's a vast amount of information and studies that's gone into this mining exercise, it still only represents that restoration is actively occurring at 1% of all reefs globally. So we still have a lot of opportunity there in terms of exploring that other 99%. When you look at this data set over time, a really important part, benchmarking where we're at relative to prior studies, is that post-2020, we have seen a huge leap in activity and a huge leap in data. And actually, when you look at all this data set together, over 60% of all information available now about restoration efficacy is built post-2020. So we have a whole new means and mechanism to describe effectiveness of reef restoration. You can see that these trajectories are simply increasing even further, and we do not expect these trajectories to slow anytime soon. Now, when you take data from all of these studies, what you actually see, and I want you to focus on the thick dashed line in the middle. This is the average success of restored coral survival over time. And actually, post-1990, once you start to see all of the efforts around reef restoration grow, you start to see that this line is pretty flat. In other words, success hasn't changed for the last 30 years or so. And that's actually an important measure for us, because the red line superimposed onto this tells us obviously a very clear story, is that against the backdrop of this success, we have seen an increasing pressure, obviously, of heat stress and damage and destruction to reefs. So even though we've seen increasing pressures on reefs, we have been able to ensure that successive restoration has remained constant. And that has been through all of the efforts to optimize methods and ensure that methods are way more effective than they've ever been before. So consequently, when you look at the deviation around this mean, this thick line, and you look at the upper bounds are increasing all the time. We're now getting very good at doing restoration if we have the right tools. Of course, at the same time, we're fighting the challenges of reef restoration, and of course, the bottom bounds are also dropping all of the time. And this actually gives us a really, really important opportunity in terms of the data, in terms of the actually mining all of the successes, and that is to ask critical questions about, well, what are the conditions, the emergent properties that lead to either above average or below average, so in other words, bright spots or dark spots of restoration success. So Julia and Steph and the team, they built this huge portal of information that really layered all of the social information, the environmental information, obviously the ecological backdrop, as well as the restoration efficacy itself. And by doing this, we're able to start imagining through this data set where the safe and effective operating space for restoration actually lies through all of this effort. And also where the fringe operating conditions are, where we actually have an opportunity to improve things further. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the details of this, but you can start to build a very clear picture about the boundary conditions that actually make restoration most successful. And this wheel here is just some examples of the factors at play. And a good example here is low algal cover is typically almost always required for you to have robust restoration success, at least across these particular studies. And so where does that leave us? Well, we now have a model where we can start to really project some important ideas. And that, first of all, is across all of the other 99% of reefs worldwide where we don't currently have restoration underway, is actually where can we potentially see the best successes? And where should we actually prioritize some of our efforts? Also, where amongst those reefs do we have an opportunity to improve things further? And this is a scenario here based on the optimization of method scenario. And what's important, you can play around with this data all you like. The important point here is that as you tweak your methods optimization, you're able actually to move where you sit in terms of your safe space and your boundary conditions. And that's really important because if you're currently operating right on the edge and you don't have optimized methods, well, you have an opportunity to improve things further. Similarly, when we think about all of this information and data as well, this doesn't really include new methods coming online about improving heat tolerance. Can we push some of these thresholds to the right even further and buy us more time? So the take-home message of this first story about evidence is we are starting to overcome our evidence problem, okay? We are now post-2020. We are starting to see a very different story emerge of the efficacy of restoration, the potential to scale, and actually an informed approach to be able to do that in an increasingly shrinking landscape. And this is just another example of really how we're pushing the dial of scale of operation pre and post-2020. And really, just to return back to this initial information here, this initial slide, and this is really to say that, as I said, these trajectories are not slowing anytime soon. And so ensuring that we use these sorts of tools to guide carefully is really, really important. So scale is obviously the main part of this presentation. We talked already about geographic scale, very large scale opportunities, as well as challenges. But when we mean scale, scale can mean different things to different folks, depending on where you work, depending on the sort of approach you take towards restoration. As I said, it's a social problem as much as it is an ecological problem to be able to overcome. And when we think about scale and its many sort of dimensions, it's actually quite straightforward to piece together the multidimensionality of it and actually start to appreciate how many restoration programs have already achieved real scale and scalability, even though the evidence base may not suggest so in actual quantitative numbers. So we're used to talking about scaling out, and that is, of course, a geographical footprint. It's all of your effort. There's also the means to scale up, and that is really where external entities begin to adopt your practices and use that to leverage new opportunity, whether it's financing, et cetera, or technology. You can also scale deep, and that's really changing the social fabric and the social norms in terms of the perception of restoration and where it sits in terms of our hunger and our appetite to integrate it into a conservation measure or social ecological norm. So we have a multidimensional challenge in front of us, but also an opportunity to be able to start understanding where different projects fit within this sphere and perhaps working closely with projects to be able to move them in scales, dimensions of scale, that they're currently not operating in. So I just want to spend a little bit of time now walking you through a few projects that I've had the opportunity to be involved with over the past few years. And how they've approached this scalability challenge and have really overcome scale, and at the same time really demonstrated extremely effective restoration outcomes. Many of you will be familiar with the Coral Restoration Foundation. It was really firmly established in about 2007, partly due to the long-standing decline in the Caribbean from disease, but also the increasing pressures alongside through heat stress, really eroding crop populations to extremely low levels. So CRF was founded through pioneering approaches such as coral trees, really drew in the coral nucleation idea at an early stage, drawing from forestry type approaches. And Operating throughout the Florida area, US Virgin Islands, and increasingly further afield and actually spreading as a network over time, they've really been able to demonstrate a very robust approach by going from the bottom up and really working with the communities to establish a firm presence. Up until 2023, CRF had recovered some coral populations by fourfold, really had improved some of the recovery trajectories, and the amount of science that had gone into doing so and really understanding how to break some of the population bottlenecking has been really, really impressive, working alongside many research organizations and opening their doors to those research organizations. And then 2023 happened. And 2023, of course, was just an incredible year for the Caribbean, not in a positive way. And that is heat stress at unprecedented scale. It was 40 days above 31 degrees over 20-degree heating weeks and absolutely decimated the acropora populations throughout the Keys. The central and lower Keys experienced a 100% mortality rate of acropora, less so in the further northerly Keys. But the point here, and Derek Manzello and team, beautiful paper on this in Science recently, really demonstrated that even the remaining coral populations in the northern Keys left them functionally extinct, certainly not without aggressive interventions able to recover the population. So a huge challenge was presented. However, the whole point of raising this story is that without all of the infrastructure, not only through the CRF, but throughout all of the efforts in the Caribbean, actually ensured that we didn't see complete extinction of the acroporids throughout that region. So it was an amazing example, and again, I'd encourage you to look at these other articles here, of how restoration was starting to think about dealing with emergencies. This is the new norm for restoration. There will be repeat heat stress events or other impacts coming for decades to come unless we solve climate change urgently. And so building the network of operation through restoration actually provided an insurance policy in this instance. And a lot of acroporas, a lot of genotypes were able to be housed and stored and have since post-2023 been used to start kickstarting and recovering nurseries and populations at scale. You know, this is part of the approach and the way in which we are going to have to rethink our conservation strategy moving forward. And of course, moving towards heat tolerance is an obvious route forward. The next example that I'll talk through is Mars, and again, we mentioned this at the beginning with Bontesua. This Hope Reef is the flagship site. And Mars take a very different approach to CRF. Mars actually work very, very deeply, changing underlying social norms from the ground up. And in this instance, really transitioning subsistence fisheries away from destructive practices towards constructive practices. And so they use this approach using Mars stars or reef frames to consolidate rubble beds, seed it with pioneering species, typically acroporids and other branching rapid colonizing species, to be able to stabilize the system and restart all of the ecological recovery that follows suit. They now operate across 17 sites, and what's really important is that the whole approach here is they send folks overseas to train existing established restoration programs. So they seed and nucleate in very different ways in terms of spreading the message and spreading the capability. And what's important here is that for every reef star that is then deployed in the wider countries, is matched by a reef star in Indonesia. So it really goes to show that the impressive scale they're operating at. They've currently restored about 40,000 meters squared of reef, which is increasingly impressive. Now, the important thing with this particular example is that within 4 years of activity, they are seeing an increase in net carbonate production that matches that of neighboring healthy reefs, so the reference sites that they use for their system. So it goes to show you can recover the system, and you can actually recover the system fairly quickly if you have the right tailored solutions. What's important here, though, and it is a good example that we still have some challenges ahead of us, is that when you look at the fish communities, they look thriving at a broad scale. But if you look really closely, and a good example in one of these papers by Tim Lamont is the butterfly fish populations and communities, you start to see the abundance increase at these healthy sites, at the restored sites compared to the healthy sites. But if you look closely at the diversity, is that some of the specialists that are typically tuned to the slower growing massive species are slower to come back into the system. And that is quite simply because this approach is designed about restoring through pioneering species and providing the canopy for the larger, massive, slower growing corals to come into play. So again, restoration is a slow process, even though we can accelerate it. The final example, and Matt mentioned this actually at the introduction, is the Coral Nurture Program. This is a project that Emma Camp and myself co-founded alongside with Wavelength Reef Cruises and the Great Barrier Reef. And it really was a real inspiration for me in terms of the journey I have had as a scientist. This was in response to the 2016-2017 back-to-back mass bleaching event on the Great Barrier Reef. And tourism operators and traditional owners have set sites on the reef where they operate and where they steward. It's extremely difficult to change site. In fact, if you're a traditional owner, why would you change site? And the principle here is that these communities and stakeholders really wanted to explore how can the growing tools of reef restoration actually work for their very specific contexts on the Great Barrier Reef. Now, to do this, we took a very different approach. It was extremely specific and bespoke contexts for this project. And so we had to work really hard. Now, can we actually not only import tools, but develop new tools, which we did so, and I won't take you on the full journey. But the point and principle here is that without having initiated this process through a really deep connection between stakeholders and scientists, we wouldn't have got this off the ground, and we wouldn't have got this off the ground as quickly and as effectively as we would have done so. And this ranged everything from working closely with the regulators through to securing funding through staged process and an evidence-based approach. In this particular example, one of the strongest elements of this project was really about demonstrating the return on investment to the stakeholders. And for us, it was through planting about 100,000 corals over 5 years, we were able to evidence, obviously, the survivorship and the actual return back into the reef system. But really what we wanted to do was an economic exercise. And actually, a good example of this has recently been conducted through CRF as well. And what we were able to show is that for every dollar we invested into the Coral Nurture Program, it secured $10 of tourism value, asset value for the reef. So it really was a worthwhile exercise. And the way we were able to do that is really understanding the social ecological relationships within the system. Where did tourism fit within not only the social fabric and its connection to reefs, but also the economic flows that are undertaken through that, and really how that's hinged to finance and opportunities and how you make this a more sustainable enterprise. So all of these examples and these three particular projects are, exemplary of many, many projects around the world. I obviously don't have time to talk about others. I will touch on a few more. But the point here is that they have evolved at a scale with which the evidence has allowed, and consequently funding based on evidence has allowed, and arguably has been slower than we would have liked and slower than could have been expected. And so what we're starting to see now, and this has been catalyzed through several programs, has been what many are referring to internally as an industrial revolution. It really is sort of restoration 2.0 for coral reefs. And that is starting to develop new tools and workflows that can really accelerate what we're seeing on the ground by ensuring that new ideas and new approaches are embedded within traditional approaches. So these are just 4 examples where some serious capital has been injected into research and development and innovation. And I'm not going to go through all of these. You'll be familiar with most of them. And I'm going to cover off a couple of them just to show you some points of difference and some of the exciting elements that are now coming through the system that are poised to help some of these restoration programs evolve and mature even more. But one point I wanted to flag before we get there is that not only are we seeing this industrial revolution through the hands of this capital injection, we're actually seeing the innovation transpire where many scientists are actually forming startups. Now, I've put a few up here. Apologies if your particular startup or established company is not present here. These are some of the ones that I've been used to working and engaging with. But the point is that we're seeing a change in which scientists are really approaching their relationship to restoration, whether it be through capital injection and R&D or startups and commercial activity. So the first example I'll circle in on is the Reef Restoration Adaptation Program in Australia. Many of you will be familiar with this. It was really kick-started after a meeting in Townsville in 2017, where, again, in response to the 2016-17 back-to-back bleaching events, it was recognized that unless we did something pretty transformative, we are going to be in serious trouble going forward. And I don't have time to talk about the depth of RAP, and there's some great websites on this you can explore for yourself. But the important thing was this was one of the first real opportunities where experts triaged all of the possibilities and the opportunities to restore reefs across sort of varying scales of wild and wacky. And in this particular instance, I'm going to focus on these two images here. These are two examples that I think we can all confidently say have distilled towards the surface extremely well. And again, I'm just put two citations here as an example of the body of works that have been produced from this program, but there are hundreds. And on the left-hand side, Carly Randall gave a spectacular talk in the conference on some of the technologies and the tech transfer pathways, which I'll come back to in a second. But this example here is really about thinking about the process engineering of restoration, the relationship between growing coral and deploying coral at scale, and really overcoming some of the engineered-based solutions that are required to move the needle. On the right-hand scale has been obviously a long-held need to really see a change in heat tolerance of our coral populations to give them a chance whilst we figure out climate change. And we're starting to see some real gains through this program and elsewhere about how we understand heat tolerance and just how far we can potentially push it. Some really, really nice examples in this instance. And as I said, as RAP comes out of its initial phase and into its post-deployment phase, we're seeing the emergence of these translation pathways back into the hands of the practitioners and stakeholders. And these are two examples from RAP that I'll just quickly focus on. One is Reef Seed, and this is containerized sexual reproduction infrastructure that can be deployed at sites and obviously position communities to work with sexual reproduction workflows in addition to the typically used asexual workflows. And then on the bottom is Reef Cloud, which has really opened up a platform to enable more standardized monitoring capabilities using a tech-based approach. Both of these really trying to solve the human-in-the-loop problem that quite often constrains a lot of our scalability. It wouldn't be obviously a talk unless I mentioned the Coast Coral Restoration Initiative. Matt mentioned I took over as director of this program about 3 years ago now. And this program was set up in Saudi partly as a means to pivot the economy, really focusing in part towards the blue economy. Saudi's reefs are long overdue for a focus in terms of conservation and a conservation toolkit, including restoration. But this project was particularly set up at the highest level of the kingdom because of a passion for reef conservation. And in this instance, the goal was fairly simple. It's how can you take some of the ingredients that were so successful and important for RAP, but embed them into a frontline facing program that can be adaptive in real time, deploy many of these technologies and refine and reiterate them. So we're still in the early phase of the program. We've just exited our pilot phase. We're about to start scaling up. It is phenomenal. We've presented several presentations throughout the conference on this, so I'm not going to talk about the details. All I will say is that we have three elements, okay? We have land, sea, and digital. The land is obviously important for us because we have an immense operations hub. The land-based facility is immense, and I don't think I can underestimate that. But it's not really just about the immense scale of the propagation we do, but we have an operations facility that was built, designed, and curated for bespoke coral restoration. And I'll come back to why that's important in a minute. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time as well talking about some of the innovations and the attention of this project. And I won't talk too much about the land and the sea per se. I want to talk digital, because this has been a really important aspect for us. Liz Gergen gave a fantastic presentation of the overview of the entire digital ecosystem of the project yesterday. And she played this video. I'm replaying it in the top left-hand corner here. And it's really to demonstrate that we work a lot of our planning in a digital space. We're all used to collecting photogrammetry these days. It really is the bread and butter of how we visualize reef systems. Analyzing it is our biggest pain. But what this platform enables us to do is, by taking our digital replica of the system, which is routinely updated, it's very much like Google Earth, we're then able to start making decisions that we couldn't do if we relied solely on in-water data collection. We can start to plan where do we need to plant coral, where do we need to locate our nurseries, and I'll show you on the next slide how we're starting to do that. I'll let the top left-hand side picture video keep playing. And the bottom right-hand side is, again, some of the digital tools we've obviously had to do to be able to complement the digital landscape, and that is ensuring that we use digital-based platforms to accelerate our workflow, working with immense numbers of corals, and working with common platforms where we can take videos in order to really extract information at a large scale to make rapid decisions. And that really is one of the key challenges we have. These are some examples where we're now turning our digital ecosystem really live. And what I mean by that is we have a digital copy, fantastic, but it's no use unless you make it functional and you turn it into an actual digital twin that is a fully living, breathing coral reef that enables you to really understand the implications of your actions. And on the left-hand side, a big shout out to Tad. This is his new model. He hasn't presented it widely at this conference. I think he's saving it for Reef Futures. But this model is really a global first. It is a highly resolved, this is one quarter hectare of our 100-hectare reef site, where you can really model and visualize the environment to a very, very precise scale. You can play around with oxygen, temperature, flow. And this has become critical in really visualizing the environmental landscape, which we've never been able to do before. We have sensors placed sporadically around the reef, and that enables us to make quite discrete and punctuated decisions that aren't live. We can now do that live. Obviously, it's not just the environment, but the ecology. And Pete Mumby and his team have been working really, really closely with us to really embed the ecological model alongside the environmental model into this system. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this. I refer you to Arnie Adams' paper recently as an example, but these ecological models are already becoming live to a point where we can make smarter decisions about where we restore, where and when, based on when we plant coral and the ecological domino effect that happens. And actually, are we making the right decisions in terms of our planting strategies and the ecological outcomes and desires that we ultimately want to make? So building these two into our into our digital copy now means we can really understand if we're undertaking restoration at a site, are we actually meeting our intended goals? And all of this is hardware in terms of not just informed decision making, but actually working closely with our regulators, policymakers, stakeholders in terms of, are we on the right track? And so just as a brief slide to close out on KCRI, and that is simply to say this is a render, I would say. However, for those of you that came to the talk on the launch of the facility, the actual facility looks exactly like this. And there was actually legal reasons we had to comply to the actual render. Our doors are open, and the whole point of this facility and this platform, this opportunity, is for folks to come and play, is for folks to come and work with us and help us transform restoration and meet our goals. We don't have all the answers. We have the opportunity, we have some of the answers, but we also want to be able to position folks that have tools and technologies to work within a system and a platform where they can work end-to-end from lab to field and iterate and learn, are the tools that are being conceived actually scalable? So to close out as well, the last thing I want to say is that, as I said, we've really approached the industrial revolution for reef restoration in a sense. So the future, in my eyes, is extremely bright. It's brighter than we have ever been before, and I'm extremely excited for the next few years. Now, a reef restoration talk would not be complete without focusing on Rose's project and Coral Catch for 2 seconds. It is exemplary of the change we are seeing worldwide, and exemplary in lots of ways. Not only as an example of one of the many, many projects that are growing live and building, but Rose's project is about really shrinking the gender gap that we have in marine conservation. It empowers women in communities not only to have an opportunity to work, but gain skills within platforms and processes that have never been possible before, and even cultural norms that have never been possible before. She is really scaling out, up, and deep in real time. It's extremely exciting to see. And projects such as Coral Catch really feed into how we as a community and a restoration community have been trying to advance the field now for almost a decade. It's the 10th anniversary of the Coral Restoration Consortium next year. I think I got that right, Tully. And importantly here, this is the central hub with which we've been able to move the needle and really provide you with the evidence to date. And we will continue to do that, but we're going to need your help, and I'll show you how in a second. And what I wanted to give a shout out here for the CRC is that we have several working groups and regional groups, and the Pacific Islands Working Group has recently formed. They had their kickoff meeting here, so I wanted to give you a huge shout out and a real thanks to ICRS for accommodating this working group and being able to really frame out the strategy going forward. It's an extremely exciting step for the CRC. So how do we go forward? And this is really where all of the conversations amongst our community, I would say, have really focused towards. And the first is that in order to make change and really build on the momentum that we have been building, we have to ensure we remain structured or improve our structure. We can do this in multiple ways, and we have been starting to do this. But we still have a lot of work to do in terms of coordination. We're getting better at doing this. But when we say coordination, it's not just us networking and having conversations. It's data, it's tools, it's processes. It's everything that you can imagine go into the toolbox to give us options and optionality to be able to ensure we maximize our success. The next part is credibility, and I think this is one of the aspects that has been lost over the past few years, but we are getting better, and this is through evidence. As I said, the evidence base is really changing the story and changing the dialogue. And the reason this is so important is for multiple reasons. We actually had a CRC conversation before this plenary, and it was really clear that policy gaps are evident, and actually a critical bridge we have to overcome. And we're only going to do that by having co-designed, collaborative conversations between what we want to do and the regulators. We'll only be able to have robust conversations in that space if we have the evidence to inform that. And of course, that comes back to how well we are structured. The third part of our, if you like, our focus moving forward has to be on sustainability, of course. And we have had some real challenges in this space in the past. We wrote a few years ago on what we called the funding scaling trap. Many projects are very hand-to-mouth. You know, you get some money, you spend it, and you look for the next grant. Grants are not the future. Financing is the future. In order to tap into that financing, we have to understand what industries want to hear. And a good example is we had a think tank meeting earlier this year where it was very clear that what we monitor and measure for restoration isn't what corporations that have an immense amount of funding to put towards marine conservation, including restoration, need to be able to report on for their environment, sustainability and governance reporting. So bridging these gaps will help us to move forward, but we have to do these three things together. Only these three things working in partnership and talking to each other will we have a robust future. And this is where you will come in. And it's really to say that for those of you that are currently not working with restoration practitioners, I would ask you the question, why not? Everyone in this room has something to offer. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you work with genes and molecules, whether you're a social scientist, it really makes no difference. Restoration needs your help, and only by working together are we going to get there. Talk to your practitioners, talk to those that are on the ground, figure out where you fit in the equation. You not only have a role, but you are the future to ensuring that all of these elements of structure, sustainability, credibility are met, and we need to do this in a partnership. And of course, that enables me to neatly dovetail down to the original tagline of this conference, working together to ensure a future for coral reefs. Only by all of us in the room meeting this vision are we going to get there. So with that, I'm just going to end on this slide. And look, apologies if your photograph's not up here. My artistry only enabled me to put a few folks here. But these folks have really contributed to this specific talk. But many of you in the room have contributed not only to my career to be able to get to this point in time and what I see as a very optimistic future, but also what we have ahead of us is extremely exciting. You've all contributed in a way. And apologies again if your image is not on the screen, but I want to thank you deeply for really changing my view and changing my perspective of what is possible with science. So thank you very much.
Just a small token of appreciation for Dave from the Society for his optimistic path forward for our society, for our community, in a way to work together to ensure the future of coral reefs. Thank you, Dave. Okay, so don't go anywhere, otherwise that ice cream you'll miss out, as we said before. I'd just like to invite Murray Ford to the stage to begin the closing ceremony. Thank you.
Seems like the ice cream is a big draw card to stick around. Yokwai Alip, it's been a great week here at ICRS 2026. What an incredible event last night. The food, the drinks, the entertainment and the choir were all world class. The crew here at NZ ICC and the conference team behind the scenes have really nailed the operational aspects of this event. It's been such a high energy and future focused week. And most of this energy comes from the graduate students and early career researchers who are driving innovative approaches to tackling key challenges in science, policy, conservation, all while bringing communities along with them as partners. I hope that every early career researcher or student has genuinely benefited from the opportunity to come here to Auckland and share their work with their community. I hope they have built networks that might endure well beyond and throughout their career. I hope friendships have flourished and been forged beyond a shared interest simply in coral reefs. Throughout this week, we've had some excellent presentations from students and early career researchers. We've had jam-packed poster sessions. At most conferences you go to, the posters can be a lonely time, standing in front of your poster, waiting for someone to come and talk to you and ask you a question. And that's certainly not been the case this week, where we have had incredible attendance at these poster sessions, audiences in front of posters while researchers are sharing short summaries and findings. It's been incredible to see. So this brings us to some awards that we have for students and early career researchers to recognise their achievements throughout this conference. I want to sincerely thank Pierre J. and Springer for sponsoring some presentation and poster awards. Their support provides vouchers that awardees can then use to drive further publication of their work. One less excuse to seeing this brilliant work in publication. So we're not going to be able to invite awardees up on stage, but we will reach out to you and contact you over the coming weeks. But I do want to read out their names, and so we can all offer a very loud congratulations at the end. Pierre J. Award for presentation by a student or early career researcher, Susie McLaren for her talk, Spatially Organising Coral Algae Symbiosis in a Challenging Environment. Pierre J. Award for poster by a student or early career researcher, Alaric Yao, for extruding complexity, additive manufacturing of artificial reefs with green concrete. Just going to pause and thank everyone who put in nominations for the poster awards. The commentary and thought you put into that was particularly helpful. I'm just going to read through the Springer Awards for poster or presentation. We have 10 of these awards. They'll each receive a €200 voucher to put towards any Springer product. We have Tim Jackson, Denisa Burbasi, Jenny Fong, Zoe Dallaert, Imi Ashley, Lucas Lutzirkin, Ashley Varela, Aurelie Aqua, Gabriella Estrada, and Kaylee Stevenson. A hearty congratulations, and I hope this is some encouragement to continue the excellent work that you've presented here this week. So I'm now going to pass over to Christian for some society awards. Unless I have a different run sheet to Christian. Is that a surprise? No?
Okay, and I welcome Verena, who's our awards chair for the ICRS, and yeah, you're going to start.
Yeah, wow, it's really bright up here, as everyone has commented on. So my name is Verena Schöpf, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the ICRS Awards, Honors, and Fellowship Committee. And so one of the great privileges of this role, and I know that I speak for the whole committee here, is that we get to read so many truly amazing nominations. So every year we're reminded just how much extraordinary work is happening across this community. And honestly, this makes our job really hard in the best possible way, because selecting just one winner, or in some cases two, is never easy. Do we have a clicker?
Next slide.
Thanks. So the Awards Honors and Fellowship Committee aims to recognize excellence and impact across the global coral reef community. And I'll also say briefly that we continuously strive to make this process more inclusive and more representative. And this year is no exception. So we have several plans in motion to further improve this whole process, because we do recognize that the global coral reef community is not yet equally represented in all its diverse dimensions. So if you do have any suggestions about this, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me and the committee. And now it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the ICRS fellows that were awarded in the last 4 years. So, please come to the stage for one group photo. So if you see your name on the list, please come to the front.
This is it? More coming. Okay, they're shy. Which way? We'll organize it, just announce it and when they come.
Okay. All right. And so now on to the Society Awards. Next slide, please. So we ask all of the Society awardees from the last few years to also come to the stage. And we will try to take photos of every group of awardees. So we're going to go in sort of clockwise direction. And so so please already come to the stage so that it won't take up too much time. But basically, the first 3 awards really recognize excellence in research at the early career, mid-career, and senior career stage. And I do want to highlight here that we do define excellence broadly here. So this is not just about a track record or publications, it is also about contributions to mentorship, community engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion relative to the opportunities available to someone. And we also award the World Reef Award in recognition of achievement in the field of coral reef research, which is reserved for researchers from underrepresented demographics, whether that's geography, a social group, gender, or background. And finally, the Coral Reef Conservation Award, which recognizes a regionally or globally significant contribution to the protection of coral reefs. Congratulations.
Yeah, so everybody can come up, but we start with the early career scientists. Niels. Okay, Daniel is not here, I know this. Thomas?
Yeah,
Okay.
so for those of you that have a friend or colleague here who can accept the trophy on their behalf, please also come to the stage. You will not have to be included on the photo, but we would be very happy for you to give the trophy to that person back home.
This is our mark, the carpet. Exit this way.
So now on to the mid-career one.
Mid-career. Okay, is this thing working now? So something entirely unexpected, so we have special contributions. We internally called this person unsung. No, sorry, wrong way around. I messed it up. So first of all, we want to give a special award to Rupert Ormond. I think he had kind of a thing because he was multiple times reminded that you have to show up for the ceremony. Rupert, please come on stage. So he basically pushed through for 12 years of Reef Encounter, which is actually a journal or a magazine I quite regularly read, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I think should actually be published in the white literature, as it's so called. So come on stage, Rupert. Round of applause.
I just want to thank everyone who contributed to Reef Encounter. They're the people who did the work and submitting articles and news items. It's been a pleasure communicating with all of you. But much more importantly, that reminds me to urge the rest of you to please also submit articles, news items. We don't publish full papers. They're just efforts to keep the coral community, the coral science community, integrated with each other. I'm really glad to report Deb Gotchfeld's taking over as editor. And if you look at the Society website, you'll see all of the past Reef Encounters on there, and you can see the types of items, the news items we publish. So you don't have to be a member, but if you're not, please join the Society and then submit articles to the Reef Encounter. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, I'll try this again. So this person who's announced now has no idea what's coming. We called him internally our unsung hero. I'm pretty sure you all reverted to what Nicolas Rivas put up as the app. Are you still here? Okay, but I think by now everybody knows this name, right? It was my lifesaver, I have to say. It was really hugely helpful. Do you want to say something about the...
Yeah, so while Nico is making his way, or yeah, I can see him already. Yes, we would like to give him a nice... Come on to the stage. We have a little thank you gift for you, and actually this is from one of one of the attendees here, an artist who paints these beautiful drawings of coral reefs, Ben Darby. Thank you. And thank you, Nico, for doing this.
I have to write everything down. Okay, Michel Pichon, he was actually on stage with the fellows, which was very nice. But again, I want to remind everyone he's the one person that attended to rule them all. He attended all the ICRS conferences, and I would hope that he agrees that this was so far his best one. Like the schedule that is next. Can somebody help me? Yeah, okay. Stacy Jupiter is coming with some remarks. Then, I don't want to screw it up. David Obura is coming. Joelle and then David. I'm gonna say something, and then, important, we also gonna announce where the next ICRS will be held. So stay on.
Kia ora everyone, Nisa Bulavinaka. We're coming near the close of our program, but we just have a few more short remarks. We've invited a couple speakers to share some of their reflections from this week, and it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Joelle Vaitayaki. Joelle is the strategic advisor with Blue Prosperity Fiji, which is a collaboration between the Fiji government and the Waite Institute. Prior to that, he is retired from the University of the South Pacific, where he was the head of marine studies, and he taught there for decades. He was very early on the voice of the importance of bringing traditional and indigenous knowledge into the conversations about natural resource management, and he's been very well cited about this, and I hope he shares with all of you about this in his remarks. So we invite to the stage Dr. Joelle.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and greetings and bula vinaka to you all, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real special time to be here, to be amongst you all, and to acknowledge the many wonderful things that are happening around the world in our attempt to make sure that we are good role models for our future generations. So I pay respect to the owners of the land on which we stand, and also to our gracious hosts, the Victorian University of Wellington, Auckland City, and the ICRS organizing committee, and everyone else that has contributed to such a wonderful gathering, huge as it is, but well organized nevertheless. It is obvious to me, and I think to most of you, that this year's symposium has been a resounding success. Over the last 5 days, we've become a big family, united in our shared commitment to do what we can to ensure the health and the well-being of productive and secure reefs for us and for our children's children in years to come. With a warming climate and all the sources of threat that we have to deal with, our coral reefs, we the people in this conference unite and pledge to do all that we can individually and collectively to give our reefs a future that they deserve and will be happy with. All of our plenary and parallel sessions testify to the great work that we all are doing for our coral reefs. The work has been demanding and costly in terms of expenses, time away from home, and all the hard work which has to be continued for the sake of what we value so much. It is the right thing to do for the ocean, for our children, and for our own peace of mind and what we believe in. To our efficient and effective hosts, we thank you very much for all that you have done for us. To our organizing committee, we salute you for your excellent organization and of all of the sessions. You have kept us engaged for the week and set high standards for ICRS, and for our own self-reflections. From this afternoon, we leave Auckland to continue our work in the part of the ocean we work in. I plead with you all that we continue to do the little that we can, and we consider some of the ideas that have been learned through this week. We all have extended our circle of friends and acquaintances, and those that we can seek some assistance from. Coral reefs are too precious for us not to use some of the new ideas that we've learned in Auckland. I plead with you that we all engage and empower our communities in government, our community members in governments, boardrooms, lecture rooms and labs, and local villages, so that they do their part in ensuring that our reefs are vibrant to support us all. Our research, our publications, and projects need to involve and empower our people to be committed to be part of the transformative change that we all know we seek in relation with our coral reefs and future generations. I am at the end of my road, but I'm proud of the fact that I was part of a little group of staff members at the University of the South Pacific in the late 1980s that decided that in the world's largest ocean, its only university at the time for most of the regional countries need to have a School of Marine Studies. So we built the program course by course and then went into certificates, diplomas, eventually into full programs for degrees, for certificates, for diplomas, to make sure that we try and make it accessible as possible. I'm really touched that throughout this week, some of my former students come and introduce themselves to me, because with the passage of time, we all also have transformed. But for me, that is, I think, my greatest contribution to the Pacific, to make sure that our students join the rest of you in making sure we look after our marine environment properly. I was raised in a village. So after I got established at the university and learned of all the challenges that we have to deal with, I had a network. It's too loose to have it registered, because villages are also quite difficult to organize, to submit regular reports and to account for finances being given to them. So we remain a network. Whatever little funds I would secure, we try and do things that they can do. And unfortunately, reforestation of coral reefs was not really very popular then, was not known at all. So we started just trying to look after what we can do, looking after the ways to make sure they don't get into the coast, planting mangroves to make sure the coastline is protected. And in some of those mangroves, now 30 years later, they are now becoming new sources of fish, which lessens in some way the effort that is spent on the reefs. And that's what they acknowledge me when I come around to say, oh, thank you very much for that, it made it easier. But I said, well, that's my contribution to you, to also share with you the benefit of the little education I was very happy to get to. At the last 2 years of my tenure at the University of the South Pacific, the Vice Chancellor then, whom I then left the university because I was not very happy with, he asked me to go and take care or look after the campus in Samoa as the acting director, while I try and appoint a new director. When I got to Samoa, I was asked by some of the people, or I was told, that some of the people there were asking, why is he? He came from the School of Marine Studies. He's now going to manage the agricultural campus. And I said to them, you have to look after your footprint on land, because we are fed up where I work in the sea with the impact that you guys continue to allow to come into the ocean. But I was there when the COVID lockdown, but I was trying to rehabilitate a river, creek, that runs along the campus, trying to clear off the invasive rubber trees and the rain trees, and then plant native trees. The trees were growing, and there was a time when flood came. Flood in the Alafua only or the river in Alafua carries water only during rainy season, heavy rain. Otherwise, the river looks like a gravel road. So, but every time the floods take place, it causes a lot of damage to the land. So lots of, you can see the widening of the river channel like quite clearly. Anyway, I remembered back in my village, there are Tahitian chestnut trees, very good for the river. So I went around Upolu looking for this Ifi tree to get some seeds. So I rehabilitated by planting Ifi trees, the riverine trees along the river, and providing a source of food for the settlements downstream. At the end of my tenure there, working with some of the students, we planted native timber trees in the farmland of Samoa, together with improved grass and taro. But for the forested land, we planted about 7 acres of native trees. And I personally, in the part of the campus that is cleared, planted, because I was living on the campus, planted over 1,000 sandalwood trees to be a source of beauty then, source of shade today, as I'm told now, and then in years to come, a source of income for the campus. So my point is that we are the blessed ones. We are the ones that have access to knowledge, to resources, to help get our communities organized wherever we are. And I think our work will be much better in saving the coral reefs if we do that a lot more. I thank you very much for listening to me.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Many thanks, Joelle, for your very kind words and also enlightening words. Now, our final guest speaker for this entire conference is Dr. David Abura. Chris will be appearing again, and I will be appearing again. But in the meantime, those of you who do not know David, and I suspect most people in this room are aware of David, but a little bit of an introduction. He completed his PhD on Kenyan reefs with Peter Glynn at the University of Miami. But he's been based in Kenya since 1997 and founded the non-profit research organization Cordio East Africa in 2003. He's built it to have a global profile since then, and he remains the director of Cordio East Africa. Frustrated by a lack of effective action on biodiversity loss and climate change, David has explored varied regional and global science policy platforms, and he's now chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the UN science platform focused on the crux of global sustainability issues. David is here as a bridge from the broader global science policy platforms to our work on coral reefs, and from this symposium to the Global Coral Reef Summit mentioned by Ambassador Thompson at our opening ceremony. This summit will be hosted by Saudi Arabia, the ICRI chair, in November this year. So please welcome David to the stage, who will provide some reflections and closing remarks on the 16th ICRS.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simon. Good morning to all. I think it's morning still. No, it's not. Good afternoon. Okay, thank you. As is the growing tradition, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Ngati Whatua Ōrākei, as well as the Mijikenda, the 9 tribes of the coast of Kenya, where I have been lucky to live for 30 years studying the coral reefs of the Western Indian Ocean and my springboard to the world. In accepting this daunting challenge from the organizers of contributing some closing remarks, I'm going to borrow shamelessly from some of the keynote speakers whose talks steered us through the last few days, marking the scope of coral reef science and knowledge in the second quarter of this most critical century in the unfolding life of our planet and the focus of our studies, and in many cases our lives, of coral reefs. I'll explain my journey here, as was introduced in our first keynote. My name, as you've heard, is David Obura, proudly of the Peter Glynn School of Observational Ecology. My birth into this space, our community, was marked by the 1996 Panama Symposium, the 8th, now 30 years ago. Almost my entire career has been studying the bleaching and recovery dynamics of corals to climate and other threats through Cordio East Africa, the non-profit research organization I set up in Kenya as a part of my expression of positionality in this space of knowledge and action. I think all of us that work on coral reefs realize the incredible privilege and richness we get from working in this most inspiring of nature's ecosystems. At this symposium, I'm most struck by the increasing diversity and breadth of our community of people from all parts of the planet, of subjects of investigation and approaches to knowing. But a worrying, though necessary trend, is an increasing uniformity of reasons for being here, which we heard about so pointedly from Ove Hoeg-Guldberg, our deserving Darwin Medal winner, around the increasing dominance of climate change as the main threat to corals globally, but with no shortage of others, such as destructive fishing and pollution. But what all have in common is they are all consequences of our global economic system. I say this as it brings me to the space I'm increasingly working in, which is the international and intergovernmental policy spheres where our countries should make agreements and ensure they are implemented to secure a better world for future generations. Ove was an early contributor in this space to the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and my path has taken me to its younger sibling, ICRS, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which has 150 country members and synthesizes knowledge to pass to countries to make decisions on managing nature and how we live from, in, or as nature. I intentionally used the word knowledge and not science, as ICRS has evolved in these recent years of acknowledging the diversity of worldviews around the planet, that all have deep knowledge systems. As we heard so beautifully of the Mautauranga Maori of this land and the Rahui of Polynesia, many knowledge systems have evolved around values of reciprocity and relationality with nature, rather than the values of linearity, consumption, and maximization that underpins most of our mainstream sciences and the global economy. These values need to be recognized in order to uncover and resolve their influence in the sciences and knowledge we use in managing our world, as much as in economic and financial domains. What is heartening for me to see is the close mirroring of this growing awareness in the work discussed here on coral reefs, on emerging diversity of approaches, diversification of questions, and the broadening positionality of so many attending this conference. We still have a push towards optimization in many disciplines, and this raises questions of power and voice, but importantly, the importance of diversity, balance, and inclusion in posing questions, interpreting findings, and making decisions is increasing. A large part of why I'm standing here now, as Simon just mentioned, is to weave some threads from our science community into the intergovernmental space convened around coral reefs. This is through the country chairing the International Coral Reef Initiative, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and SHAMS, or the General Organization for Conservation of Coral Reefs and Turtles in the Red Sea, that hosts the ICRS Secretariat. The importance of this was highlighted by the presence in our opening and for several days of the conference of Ambassador Peter Thompson of Fiji, the Ocean or SDG 14 Ambassador of the United Nations. Saudi Arabia is convening the first ministerial summit on coral reefs in early November, slotted between the biodiversity and climate COPs, or conferences of parties. A few of us from this process have been here in Auckland to make the most of this convening of the world's coral reef scientists to ground and inform the ambition for upscaling policy and finance through the summit. It's not possible to synthesize the whole conference, but the symposium organizers have highlighted 3 key threads through some media briefings, which I was able to attend, and I'll try and paraphrase some top-line messages here. So first, of course, climate change is top of the agenda, and the prime need to halt the drivers of warming and acidification. Here, IPBES's frameworks are explicit that while this is most immediately about greenhouse gas emissions, the underlying drivers are economic and thus societal rather than technological, about the values driving the global economy. Ove's warnings of 30 years ago have come uncannily true, and questions now revolve around how far will this go, how quickly, and can it be reversed? Crucially, the diversity inherent in nature means that there are refuge or winner reefs, and we must ensure those are as many as possible and not decimated by other avoidable causes. But at the same time, we must work out how to support the places and people not fortunate enough to be in that minority of best reefs. All reefs are someone's home. We heard that it is always worthwhile to save or invest in one's home. And the system that is pushing them into such decline must both transform and reinvest in regeneration to support new life in all those places. The fields around novel and scaled interventions to give reefs a chance are growing like wildfire, as they should, and as we have just heard in the last keynote. They're now spreading focus across the genetics and full life histories of corals to other key species and on the ecological functions and supporting mechanisms that all need to work for a place to earn the label coral reef. Critically, solutions are needed that match culture and context, and the importance of adapting institutions and values, as revealed in the incredible story of Polynesian Rahui. And finally, the growing message and recognition of diversity of voices. And here I heard a mantra that is increasingly common: nothing about us without us. And turning the tide of centuries of cultures of domination and economic globalization that have led us to this point of breaking planetary boundaries. And the accompaniment to this is that this is not a narrative of weakness or just redressing wrongs, but acknowledging the creativity and gains from empowering people's strengths, insights, and agency. Here, women, youth, indigenous peoples, communities, citizens, all have rights to be and contributions to make at the table. So we certainly have our work cut out for us. We certainly must fight tooth and nail to make sure the loss of coral reefs is minimized. But like the Rahui that adapt with context, we must also ensure the places where people will no longer live by reefs are not sidelined, suffering a double injustice. Novel reefs and ecosystems will emerge that must sustain future generations, and we have the responsibility and power to make those as good and healthy as possible. So, thank you for this opportunity to speak, and I look forward to seeing many of you in the coming years in a diversity of places, and all together again somewhere in 4 years. Thank you.
Still no ice cream, I'm sorry. But I'm gonna be quick. First of all, thank you so much, David. He kindly agreed to steer the ICRS herding the cats of ICRS through this scientific document for the summit. Okay, to the announcement, I really have to follow this list. So first of all, I was asked to put up a brief announcement. So there will be a ICRS, European Coral Reef Symposium on 28. You can Google it and find more out about it. And then, drum roll, the International Coral Reef Symposium. Hey, everybody's awake. It's gonna be Brazil. Okay, I really need a microphone to run around. I'm too jiggery. Not sleep, no sleep, too much coffee. Okay, so first of all, if you're still here, congratulations, you made it through. Second, I want to thank everybody that made this possible. Also, all of you that took the effort to came here and contribute to all the talks, discussions, and so on we had. I think this was a really incredible conference. And I was, when I saw the keynotes, I was like taken and shaken and back and forth, and I talked to various people, what should I say to send you off? And I wanted to say something that I actually mean and that is not too cheesy or meant to make us feel good. So I wrote something down. I'm going to read it to you because I'm really too stream of consciousness that I don't get it other together, but it's very short, but yeah. You will see and you can tell me after. So first of all, tēnā koutou katoa, greetings to you all. We have spent this week confronting what is happening to coral reefs, and none of us needs another reminder of how serious the situation is. But I do not want us to leave Auckland with despair, because there's an important difference between knowing that we cannot save every reef and believing that there's nothing left to save. There is. So there are reefs that will persist longer than others. There are corals that cannot tolerate heat stress better than others. There are places where local actions can buy time, and there are interventions that can make a difference. And there's still an enormous amount of stuff that we don't know. So our job as scientists is not to promise that everything will be fine. Our job is to find out what can survive, where it can survive, why it can survive, and how we can give it the best possible chance. That is not optimism, that is a scientific question. It's a conservation imperative. And increasingly, it is our responsibility. And I think there's something that we need to acknowledge. For a long time, we were all entirely comfortable with producing the best science possible, and then we left it to others to act up upon it. I think it's not enough to generate the evidence, publish it, and communicate it. We have to do something else. If the evidence tells us that decisions being made today will determine whether coral reefs persist, then we have a responsibility to bring that evidence into the places where those decisions are made. And I think that was my take-home message from Ov's keynote. Like, if we know that it's wrong, or if we know what makes a difference, we have to make an effort to go to these places where these decisions are basically debated or made. That does not mean that we have to compromise our scientific independence, but it does mean that we all have to become much harder to ignore. We need to speak beyond our labs, beyond our institutions, and beyond conferences like this one. We need to engage governments, industry, communities, and the public. Not simply when we are invited, but whenever there's an opportunity. And whenever the evidence demands it, or even create the opportunity. And I think this was my take-home message from Julia's beautiful keynote. We also have to create those opportunities. Because science that never reaches the decisions that determine the future of coral reefs cannot change that future. So I'm coming to my last parts. The reefs of the future will not be the reefs of the past. We all know that, and we should all be honest about that. But I think it's important to keep in mind, or at least I refuse to give up the belief that their future is not yet written either. Some of that future will be determined by climate, some by politics, some by chance, and some of it will be determined by what the people in this room decide to do next. So when we leave Auckland, let us not leave simply better informed about what we are losing. Let us leave more determined to protect what still can be saved, and then make sure that it is. Let us be prepared to fight for it with evidence, with integrity, and with a much louder voice. So I'm always being told that I'm scared to be approached because I look grim. I hope I'm not. I hope I didn't look too grim at this conference. But I can be a very angry person, but I just told somebody, some students from Monica who approached me earlier, that you can use this as a gift. It's actually good to be emotionally attached to something because it means that you care. So we may not be able to save every reef, but history will judge us by what we did for the ones we still could. So I want to end with 2 quotes who actually made a big difference in my life, and they are also address various questions we had after the keynote. The first one is widely attributed to Margaret Mead, the American anthropologist. So I quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And the second one, let's see how you appreciate this, is from a somewhat different source. It's from Rage Against the Machine, an American rock band from their song Guerrilla Radio. "It has to start somewhere, it has to start sometime. What better place than here? What better time than now? All hell can't stop us now." Thank you. Okay. And oh God, Jesus, sorry. I want to invite Simon back to the stage.
Right. Thanks, Chris. We are very nearly there. It's nearly ice cream time. There will be a formal farewell, brief farewell after I'm done, but I'd just like to end with a few closing comments, largely non-science related. So I hope you've all had a hugely enjoyable week. I know I have. I'm going to have a long lie down after this. But I'm hoping that many of you have a chance to visit some of this beautiful country. Some of you might have been here for a little while, but if you haven't, you've got a chance to leave the confines of Auckland city centre and see some very beautiful places. My personal favourites, if you're in the North Island, head to Tongariro National Park. If it's not raining, you might see some spectacular volcanoes. And Lord of the Rings fans, it's the home of Mount Doom. And also, if you're heading to the deep south of the country, Fiordland National Park, it's also spectacular. But however long you've got, I hope that you have a fantastic time. I've been here for 23 years, despite my still very English accent. So every, I continually find new, beautiful places to explore here. So I would also just like to thank you all on behalf of my co-organisers, I see Stacey and Murray sitting over there, Matt, and all the other people involved on the Science Committee, and the many people involved behind the scenes, as well as our host, Victoria University of Wellington. They paid me to say that. So it's been a huge honour to have you all here. If you do get a chance, please come to Wellington. It's, whisper it quietly, way nicer than Auckland. It's a beautiful city. It's also the world's windiest city, so I can't promise you'll have very nice weather. Also, most importantly, I hope that you've had a great week of re-engaging with old friends, making new friends, building new collaborations, learning new methods. I've learned all sorts of new things this week. Just being inspired and really linking back to what we've heard from David and Chris. Ultimately, be ready to make a difference. Obviously, time is running out, but I'm hoping one thing we set out with this meeting was to have a positive message to portray to the world and to portray to the community, and certainly the comments that came through and Dave's fantastic plenary earlier as well. So communicated this, showing that if we work together, we can really make a big difference, and it's so wonderful to see everyone here in person collaborating and trying to find a way forward. So on that note, I should also just remind people, or if you didn't know, we do have a conference proceedings. So Coral Reefs has kindly agreed to publish our conference proceedings. I, for my sins, have agreed to lead that. This is like the gift that never stops giving. So myself, and we have about 10 other editors currently, if you would like to submit a paper based upon your work that you presented here to Coral Reefs, the closing date for that's the 1st of November. There's a link on the conference website that you can go to. But beyond that, I'd like to wish you all very, very safe travels. goodbye from me, goodbye from the organising committee, but it's not the very final goodbye, because this is New Zealand, and we always have a formal farewell. So with that, I would like to, T, who you saw at the opening ceremony, will conduct what's called a poroaki, a formal Maori farewell. And so, is T here somewhere? Can't see, we've got my glasses on. There he is. So I'm going to pass over to T. With that, thank you very much.
Ha tā whakinui a he mata ki nā mai rā te kupu atu ai, nuku atu ai, rangi ki runga ki au ki tēnei manga o te akamatu ai atu nei. Nā au ko wāhi aroa, ko rata, ko tū whakararo, ko whakatau pōtiki, ko au, ko rongo mai, ko Ngāti Whātua oi. He kauri tū au, he mānuka, he matakahi, ki te aro o reo kia rere, o reo kia tika, o reo kia Māori. Ko te kaha kei au, he kaha tua tini tini, he kaha tua mano mano. Ka puta rā ki te whai ao, puta ki te ao mārama, uhi, wero, tau mai te mauri o haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. O tēnei au ko te uri o manu manu, ko te aitanga te ki. He matakahi, he mānuka, he kāhika, hei ahu mai te kohanga tapu tapu o te. Hei te ware o te mānuka, hei te ware kura o manu kapua. Tēnei au te hoatu nei, hakai a wai, whanāringa, hei kai a te watu, hei kai a te marama kei te whai au, kei te ao marama e tihei. Tihei Māori ora. Just got a bit hot in here. Oh. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Looks like after a whole lot of 5 days we have woken up from the opening ceremony that we had here today. But it is my honour and duty to close this symposium on behalf of the local tribe, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, as a descendant of Te Kawau, our ancestor, who gifted the land that Te Tumu NZICC stands upon. And now today, I wanted to start by acknowledging each and every one of you. Although the ocean you work in is cold, sometimes icy, sometimes moody, sometimes absolutely determined to remind you who's really in charge. The people, though, the people who protect it are some of the warmest humans I've ever met. It's one of the ocean's greatest contradictions. You spend your days in and around water that would make a penguin file a formal complaint. Yet you move through this conference radiating a kind of warmth that could soften even the saltiest sea. Throughout the week, I walked around this gathering. I watched connections spark. You stopped me mid-stride for a yarn, a laugh, a story, sometimes all of the above. And every interaction carried a glow that no ocean current could ever dim. There's a brightness in each and every one of you that feels tidal, steady, rhythmic, and impossible to ignore. Now I promise, I truly tried to find a more sophisticated word for this warmth, something academic, something befitting a room full of marine scientists, reef guardians, and tide whisperers. I searched for terminology that would impress even the seasoned researcher. But in all honesty, the only word that fits is vibes. You are all a vibe. Now, you're not just ordinary vibes, you're ocean grade, reef safe, climate resilient, premium quality vibes. The kind of vibes that remind us that even in the coldest waters, the warmest hearts rise to the surface. You arrived on Monday as manuhiri, as honoured guests. You have stood within our ancestral mountains, walked beside our rivers, our waters. You've listened to the stories of this land and felt the korowai, a cloak of protection that surrounds this building we call Te Tumu. Now, as we prepare to depart, you leave not as visitors, but as part of our wider whānau, our extended family. And well, now since you're family now, just know that the next time you return, the next time you're in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the next time you're in Auckland, or even the next time you're here at NZICC Te Tumu, don't be surprised if someone hands you a tea towel. You'll be on the dishes, stack and wipe duty, or at the very least helping pack down the chairs and tables. And of course, I'm only joking. These chores are simply a playful nod to the connections, the trust and sense of belonging created here at NZICC. They symbolise that you are no longer strangers to this place, but part of the living network of relationships that give Te Tumu its strength. As our proceedings draw to a close, let us return once more to the heartbeat of this week's gathering, to Tangaroa. Now, Tangaroa is the god of the sea to us Māori folk. He is the pulse beneath the waves, the keeper of calm and chaos, the ancestor who binds us to the oceans you study, safeguard, and honour. His domain has shaped your purpose, guided your inquiry, and called you across oceans to be with us in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, as you return to your homes, your labs, your vessels, your villages, and your research sites, may the vast rhythms of Tangaroa move with you. May his tides steady your thoughts, may his currents sharpen your insight, and may his whispers across the water guide your decisions with clarity and purpose. The knowledge exchange here does not end within these walls. It travels outward like ripples across a still harbour, touching new shores, informing new discoveries, and strengthening the well-being of Tangaroa and all who depend on him. Before we depart, I offer this final thought. The strength of any gathering is not measured by its size, and by do I mean this is a big-sized event, but it's measured by the connections it nurtures. This week, those connections have stretched across oceans, across disciplines, and across cultures. May they continue to grow long after we leave this room, binding us in shared purpose and shared responsibility as kaitiaki, guardians of Tangaroa. Now, as you make your way home, whether your journey carries you across the city, across the country, or across the world, I wish you a safe, steady, and gentle return. May the warmth of this gathering travel with you, and may the purpose we have shared continue to guide your steps long after you leave this place. In this final moment, it is my honour to place a karakia, a blessing over our proceedings, a gesture of thanks for the knowledge exchanged, the relationship strengthened, and the collective intention that has shaped our time together. For Māori, karakia is more than a prayer, it's more than a blessing. It is a bridge, a way of acknowledging both the seen and the unseen, the physical world and the spiritual currents that move beneath it. When we offer karakia for safe passage, we are not simply wishing you well. We are calling upon the natural world, upon our ancestors, upon the forces that shape our environment to walk beside you as you travel. Karakia is the breath that steadies the path ahead. It is the quiet voice that asks the winds to be gentle, the tides to be calm, the road to rise kindly beneath your feet. It is our way of wrapping you in a korowai, a cloak of protection as you depart from this place. So when we offer karakia, we are saying, may your footsteps be light, may your travels be safe, may the world greet you with kindness, and may you carry the connections formed here at NZICC, the relationships, the learning, the shared purpose into every space your journey leads. Karakia for us at NZICC is our final act of care, our final act of hospitality, our final reminder that once you have stood with us, you do not walk alone. Now for this prayer, I need some crowd participation. So can everyone say, Tai kie? Tai kie. Now during my blessing, I'll say, Haumie huie, and I want you to answer with Tai kie. Let's give it a go. Haumie huie. Haumie huie. Tai kie in essence can just mean amen, or that you're agreeing with what I say. So if I ask for 1,000,000, you have all agreed for it, all right? Now, if you forget haumie huie during this blessing, during this karakia, just watch me. I'll put my hand up. That gives you the intention. Say tai kie, all right? Remember, haumie huie? All right. Me noi tātou. Let us pray. Mānawa mai te putanga o te ariki, mānawa mai te putanga o te taura o te tauira. Ka eke rongo rupe, ka eke rangita hua hua. Tēnei te matakahi, tēnei a maunga nui ki tā maki, a tā maki ki maunga nui. Tēnei ngā tihi, tēnei ngā wai, tēnei ngā tapu. Tēnei au ko whakatau pōtiki, te toa tā mau au runga Hawaiki. Te topa nei, te tū nei, kei ngā taumata. Taumata o te reo, taumata o te mātou, taumata o te ora. Ka putara ki te whaia, puta ki te ao mārama. Turuturu e rangi, turuturu e papa. Haumie, huie! Haumie, huie! What do I do from here? That's my job done. So thank you for joining us here at NZICC. E mihi o nui ana, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa.